The thesis of this video has been that the use of routine outcome monitoring is so valuable, and the data really support this, that it's increasingly understood as a best practice. And yet the data show that its use is still far from widespread. One study found that indeed most therapists do regard routine outcome monitoring positively, but that the likelihood of using it was higher for therapists who were A, younger, B, who were more CBT oriented, which is curious because it's really atheoretical, and C, whose agencies mandated that they do so. And I think that's really kind of a crucial point, that unless the agency has embraced this as part of their culture of evidence-based practice, it's probably not going to happen. And even the agencies that do embrace it and systematically collect client data do not necessarily have mechanisms to ensure that the therapists use the data. And so we wanted to conclude this video then by having a conversation with Dr. Robbie Babbins-Wagner, who directs the Calgary Counselling Centre, which has done extraordinary work with this. What we don't have time to get into in this video are the data that shows that even though therapists believe they get better as they have more experience, that's simply not the case, at least not for the average therapist. There are some exceptions, but for the average therapist, there's really no improvement in outcomes across time, and at least one study shows even a modest decline across time. Again, even though the therapists believe they're getting better. One exception to that, though, is a study of the Calgary Counselling Centre that Dr. Babbins-Wagner directs, and it found that those therapists actually did improve in effectiveness across time, largely because they were using routine outcome monitoring coupled with consultation. And so I'm delighted that we're able to end this video with an interview with her so she can talk about the processes they went through to make that happen. I'm delighted to have with us Dr. Babbins-Wagner, who's director of the Calgary Counselling Centre. And as I've already mentioned, they've done extraordinary things with using routine outcome monitoring. So, Robbie, would you introduce us to the Counselling Centre and then talk about how it is you've accomplished what you have with respect to routine outcome monitoring?
Calgary Counselling Centre is a community-based nonprofit or a charity in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. Calgary is Canada's fourth largest city. We're an energy-related city, so oil and gas really drives a lot of what keeps this city going, as well as tech innovation. The center sees folks from all over our region. For people that don't know Calgary, 3 hours from the Montana border, and we're just an hour east of the Canadian Rockies. When people come to seek our services for a range of specialized services that may not be available in their communities. So we see everybody. We don't have any real restrictions on who can seek our services. They just have to have a problem. Last year, we did about 11,232 intakes, which was a growth of about 17% from the year before. So let me go back a bit, probably 20 years, because had we had this conversation 20 years ago, it would be very different. I wasn't interested in research. I wasn't interested in outcomes. I was the kind of grad student that did everything possible not to take research and stats. And I became interested in this kind of inadvertently, because I had to do an evaluation of a project. The funder wouldn't fund that, and I had to go back and learn how to do this. I was teaching at University of Calgary at the time in the Faculty of Social Work, and I said to my peers, who wants to teach me how to do this? And became really interested in the story that the numbers could tell as a parallel to the client stories. And then one day, a colleague of mine told me I needed to read this book, and the book was The Heroic Client. And I just felt that book spoke to everything that I was thinking about in terms of my career, the work that I was doing clinically at that point in time. And I went to a conference that the authors put on in Toronto and came back higher than a kite, wanting to read everything that was written about this work. And it really appealed to me intellectually and clinically. And I had no idea at that point what my journey would be, because it ended up resulting in an implementation at Calgary Counselling Centre, but also my going back to school to do a PhD. But the journey in implementation has been the hardest thing I've ever done, but also probably the most rewarding and the most interesting work of it.
So, well, tell us about that. So you really created a culture there that I think is unusual in most agencies.
So we did a pilot in 2002, and that ran till about early 2004. We had the staff use different measures, and we compared at that point the OQ and the outcome rating scale. And we had our teams divided into two, and half of them used the OQ and the other half used the ORS. And then after 6 months, they switched. And so they used the other measure. And kind of about 14 months, at about the 14-month point, we, being very Canadian, had people sat down and I said, so what do you think about this? Do you think we should try it? Do you think it's worthwhile? And people voted to use the OQ and the longer form SRS. Today, as an administrator, I would do my research. I would make the decision about which tool most suited our organization and would implement using that, and just share that with the staff that this is a decision we've made organizationally. But the staff seemed very keen and gave us initially the impression that they were all very keen and wanted to do it. And then when we started implementing September 2004, we kind of looked at the data about a year later, and this was all manual. You know, we're doing it in Excel. We were only tracking first and last session scores with both measures. And it kind of looked like we had a really good amount of data kind of in 2006. But as we got deeper into the analysis in 2007 and 8, we discovered that only 40% of the staff had actually offered the OQ to their clients. People were kind of saying they were doing it, but they were really not keen to do it. And they were really afraid of what they would learn. They were afraid that we would use it for performance management, meaning that their raises and their progress in their careers would be impacted by this. They really didn't believe the clients were going to be truthful. They thought that these things were useless and weren't going to help us achieve some of what we thought were the objectives at the time. So I heard probably every excuse possible not to use the measures. So I had to make probably one of the toughest decisions I've ever made. And as an administrator, I had to let everybody know that in September 2008, this was no longer optional. That using the OQ was part of their job, that this would never be, and it never was, a performance metric at our organization, but the performance metric was going to be the percentage of your clients that actually use the OQ. And that they had to offer it to clients in such a way that increased the likelihood that the clients would do it. Now, remember, I'm still a clinician, and I remember the old days when I first started working with a one-way mirror, and I could go into a room and ask clients for permission to have a team behind the mirror and ensure that they'd say no because I didn't like who was behind the mirror. Or I could ask in a way where I would be almost 100% certain they said yes. And kind of that's what I was talking about. And our philosophy was that and still is, the clients have the right to say no. But as a member of this team and as a member of this organization, you had a responsibility to ensure that it was offered to a client in a way that increased the likelihood of their participation. Well, after we did that, people seemed to kind of say they would do it. And between September and December, 40% of our staff left. And I will never forget the day that our now director of counseling walked into the office. And she said to me, "Robbie, how do you know this is the right thing to do?" And I said, "Everything I've ever learned and everything in my soul tells me that we're on track to do this, because it's giving clients a voice in what's happening. It's giving us a way of understanding whether we're making progress or not. And it just, to me, I think we'd be making a mistake if we stop this right now. And we're still together today, she and I, managing a team now that's almost 4 times the size that it was in 2008, because the process involved in implementation and the process involved in creating the culture has allowed us to create a really strong, cohesive team. Mm-hmm. And achieve what we're now calling breakthrough results. Wow. The whole process for us is totally transparent. There are no secrets in what we're doing. So clients get to see their results. Like now it's automated. So when they press done on the tablet, and it's available in 17 first languages, the graph comes out of the printer, and you're expected to share it with your client. If the client wants to take it home, great. Nothing makes me more excited than to see clients in the elevators holding their graphs. It tells me they're engaged in the process when they want to take it home with them. And we initially didn't really produce any serious stats with this. The focus really was on engaging the counselors and doing the work, helping them understand how to use the scores, how we're going to focus on clients that weren't progressing. And our focus in supervision and in our consultations is really about the non-progressing client. And we only started producing stats and graphs when this counselor started asking for them. And when we run data, even today, when we're doing something new, we actually run the data blind. So if we're looking at variances amongst clinicians, we look at the data blind because we don't want to know who the people are. It's much harder to make good decisions if you're thinking about the people than if you know who they are. So what's happened is we would present the data blind, and the counselors would say, can we see our own? And I would say, are you ready for that? And what are you going to do if the results aren't what you're hoping they're going to be? And we would have those discussions for a couple of weeks before we would actually share some reports. And we'd always share the reports in a meeting with all the counselors together, so that people could talk about them. We put them up on the screen if somebody wanted. And we kind of built a series of reports for the counselors based on their growing interest and curiosity. Mm-hmm. So every counselor now, every 3 months, gets a report that shows them the progress of their clients in that, it's actually, we do it every 4 months, in that trimester. And then the second trimester of the year has 8 months. And then the year-end report shows the whole year. So now some of them are saying, okay, I want to look at my report from last year to see if I made any progress. So they're looking at their clients to see the percentage of clients that are in those 4 categories. We produce their effect sizes. We look at the number of single session clients that they've had, and we compare it to our average, as well as the average that the research talks about. And we're striving to do better, but we're not pushing to do better. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, so I'm struck with how you've created it. It sounds like a sense of safety to do this, and then along with that, then built curiosity, so that people really want to dig in and explore what it means to them and their work.
Yeah, I think that's happened. So, but I didn't set out to do it deliberately. Like now I'm trying to describe, I'm going to be writing about this in the next year or so. I'm trying to describe how we did this. And it's actually, it probably was more intuitive than it was deliberate in those days. And now I think we want to write it up so that we can help others who are wanting to do some of this within their own agencies. We're just so excited because we're developing, I would say, more authentic relationships with our clients, as evidenced by some of our experience using the session rating scale, using the Alliance tool, and also using the outcomes tool and having clients give us feedback about what's working for them and what's not working for them. and using that to inform practice. So it's not about us. It's really about helping the clients get the results they're looking for. And everybody in our agency now uses that as their mantra.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. I very much appreciate your time. I know people are going to be inspired by the lessons you've learned and are able to pass on.
My pleasure.